I have different motivations when it comes to what gets me started on a book. Sometimes it is to increase my overall knowledge on biblical materials. Others it is so I can better defend or present my own faith. But with overcoming bitterness, this was to help my personal relationship with God and others in my life. I've had a personal struggle with bitterness for my entire life, be it toward my brother when we were kids, to someone who leaves my church without explanation. I am very prone to the thoughts and feelings of bitterness eating away at my soul whenever I am harmed by the actions of others. Reading Overcoming Bitterness is a small step in my journey toward trying to gain some control over my personal feelings of bitterness, and I think one reason I have allowed bitterness to fester for so long and in so many areas in my heart is that, one, no one can really see it, so it's relatively easy to hide, but also it's very easy to assume most people struggle with bitterness anyways, so it's not that big of a deal. Well, I think all sin is an affront to God, so it is a big deal, and it is time for me to deal with my bitterness. I found Stephen Viars' book, Overcoming Bitterness, moving from life's greatest hurts to a life filled with joy, to be very helpful and encouraging on that front. First, he caused me to look at bitterness from a perspective I never really considered before. And I think that one change alone could be a game changer in how often I allow bitterness to have a foothold in my own heart. I normally think of bitterness almost exclusively as the feelings in my heart following a disappointment, when, according to the Bible, bitterness is also circumstances in our lives which we all face. The first 5 chapters in this 12-chapter book are all about how bitter circumstances are what makes for a bitter heart. And for people who struggle with bitterness, the battle doesn't start when the bitter feelings are beginning to stir up in our souls. If we wait until then, most likely we are fighting a battle that we will lose. But the time to fight the spiritual war against bitterness is when the bitter circumstances first enter our lives. So it's that moment that you first get the awful report from the doctor, or when the AC bill comes in the mail this month and it is twice as high as normal, or your favorite person in the world speaks the most humiliating words about you before others. Whatever the circumstance is that brings bitterness to you, you begin to confront the bitterness not when those dangerous feelings are starting to grow, but as soon as the trial begins. And you confront that bitterness by looking to Christ at the very onset of your fear or pain or shame. I need to share a personal story to illustrate how impactful this book has already been on my life. I'm a hobby runner. I run a couple of times a week, and I track all of my runs on the app Strava. It tells me how far I ran, how fast, how long, everything I want to know about it. Well, last week I went for a run around my neighborhood in hopes of creating a new route, and I wanted to see just how long it was. I was hoping that it was going to be about 5 miles, but I wasn't sure it was going to be that long. Well, halfway into the run, the battery on my Garmin watch died, and I didn't get the second half of the run on Strava. So I ran probably about 2 miles, and I got 0 credit for it on my app, and I couldn't figure out how long my new route was. Now, this disappointment would normally send me into this depressing, bitter mindset, probably for the rest of the morning or the rest of the day. But after reading Overcoming Bitterness, I chose instead to dwell on how cool it is that I can run 5 miles with relative ease, when a couple of years ago I couldn't run a single mile. And how thankful I am that God has allowed me to come along on this exercise journey. You see, overcoming bitterness changed my response to a bitter situation, and it had a real impact on my soul that day. As Stephen wrote, bitterness is not first a response, it is first a reality. So confronting bitterness is about dealing with those bitter realities in a God honoring way. For some of us, it is learning the difficulty of beginning to practice lament, crying out to God instead of stewing in and feeding our fears. For others, it is responding to a bad situation by praising God in contentment instead of dwelling on the disappointment that you just received. This book gave me a whole new way to confront bitterness at the very outset before it begins to gnaw at my soul. Then this book also has a wonderful journey through the Old Testament book of Ruth. If you've read Ruth before, you know the story of beautiful Naomi, a woman who has very bitter circumstances come into her life. She loses her husband and her 2 sons and is so embittered in her heartache that she tells her neighbors, "From now on, call me Mara," the Hebrew word for bitter. And Stephen Viars uses Naomi's story to help us to see that when we fall into bitterness, how God can carry us out of that bitterness we are right now enduring, and also helps us to be like Ruth and encourage those in our lives who are currently struggling with bitterness. So I found this book to be really helpful, a little bit more than I even expected it to be. And I think this book could be even better if you read it as a group to take advantage of the study guide questions at the end of every chapter. I think this book could be a life-changing 12-week study for people who come together who are currently enslaved to bitterness in their own hearts. And I think this book will be even more effective as a group. Lord willing, I believe that those who are reading Overcoming Bitterness and take this book to heart, put the wisdom into practice, they will find significant and powerful impacts on their struggles with bitterness. If you've enjoyed this review and you are new to the Rev Reads YouTube channel, I would encourage you to subscribe so that you can stay engaged and informed on the wonderful world of Christian literature. And if you're somebody who's been around for a while and you want to support the channel and what we're doing here, you could become a patron by going to patreon.com/RevReads.